Okay, so we're going a little backwards. We had more or less finished, although it's good to go over it, and I do want to go over it later again. Perek Yud Aleph, which are the inyanim of Geula, the inyanim of Mashiach, and you'll remember one important yesod that the Gra said there, that the limud HaTorah will be the main thing that will bring Mashiach, but then he says, within Torah, it'll be the limud of Pnimiyas HaTorah. Kabbalah. The Gra basically said it'll be in Kabbalah that we will merit the Geula HaSida. So really, it's no accident, according to that, why in this door there is such a renewed interest in inyanim of Kabbalah. Now, like anything else, all inyanim of Kedusha can be distorted and become makulkal. That's the nature of things. The greater the Kedusha, the more the Yetzer Hara tries to bring in things that negate it. So thus, with the rise of the Limud HaKabbalah, you have all sorts of fake things. You have non-religious spiritual teachers. You have fake Kabbalists, etc. But you see, instead of showing, therefore Kabbalah is a bad thing, it's the other way around. That actually shows Kabbalah is a great thing and a powerful thing, and therefore the Sitra Achra comes and it wants to be makalkil, so it doesn't elevate us. But the emes is the natiyah, the inclination within us to learn Pnimiyas HaTorah, that is really because it's the Zman of the Geula, and in the Zman of the Geula, that will be the way we bring the Geula, is by the kesher to Pnimiyas HaTorah. Now it's interesting, if you were just given this statement and you were not told, who said it, you might think, the Baal Shem Tov, or the Arizal, or you wouldn't automatically associate it with the Gra, but it's the Gra. And you have to know that the Gra was considered to be greater even in Kabbalah than he was in Nigla, which is quite amazing. We know the Gra's phenomenally amazing greatness in Nigla, and Kabbalah was even beyond that. So the Gra was a great, great Makubal, and in fact, almost everything we have from the Gra himself, meaning most of the teachings of the Gra, Talmidim wrote down, like Mishlei, other things, but the things we have from the Gra himself are kemat all on Kabbalah. Perushim on the parts of the Zayar, the Sefer Yetzirah, the Raya Mehemna, the Safra Tzniya, so these are parts of the Zohar. That's what the Gra wrote. The Ksav Yad of the Gra is mainly on inyanim of Kabbalah. So he was really very, very tremendous in inyanim of Kabbalah. So that's why there's such a netiyah. Now the emes is, although the Gra would lav davka endorse learning Sifrei Chasidus, that I think would be too much of a stretch in light of the Gra's Isnagdus to Chasidus. But the truth is, this is also the shayrish of Chasidus, because what Chasidus is, or at least one superficial way of describing it, it's a very superficial way, but it's a certain aspect. Chasidus did involve what you might call the popularization of Kabbalah, because Chasidus took inyanim of Kabbalah and tried to make them accessible to people, Dover HaShabel L'chol Nefesh. But Chasidus Befrat is totally based on inyanim of Kabbalah, and I can see in my own lifetime the great rise of learning Chasidus in the yeshiva world. When I was a Talmud in Ner Yisrael in Baltimore, many years ago, the limud of Chasidus was very, very, very rare. In fact, we had one person, and Baruch Hashem, he's still alive, Rav Nachum Lansky. He should be well now. He's Baruch Hashem Mizarkein. He was our resident, Chassidish expert on Rav Tzadok and the Sfas Emes, and people gravitated to him. But he was like the only one. Like nobody else was touching those inyanim. Now you go to any Beis Medrash here, Mir, Panovich, Hebron, wherever you're going to go, you'll see Sfas Emes, you'll see Rav Tzadok, you'll see sometimes Tanya. If you're more adventuresome, even the Baal Tanya's other Sfarim, Torah or Likutei Torah, which are more advanced Sfarim. And there's a tremendous thirst for that type of Pnimiyus, that type of inner dimension. And according to the Gra, he would explain it, that this is part of the Neshama being Margish, that we are approaching the Zman of Geula, and therefore we need to double up on this limud of the Pnimiyus HaTorah, right? So it all ties into what the Gra says in the Even Shelaima. So now, though, I'm going to go backwards to Perek Ches, and we'll actually learn a Perek that's very negeya to Bnei Yeshiva, and the Perek is called B'darchei Halimud the derech, right? Everyone also knows what's the derech that I should learn. Inyane lishma, and what is Torah lishma, and then he'll go back to Panemius HaTorah, the inner dimension of the Torah. Okay, so Sif Aleph says, this is Perek Ches, Kamai shebi umnis sarach l'lamed umnis tekiya she'ein ba gneva b'yisr v'kala. So there is an idea when you're preparing yourself or your child for an umnis. Umnis means a profession. So Rabbi Meir says at the end of Kedushin, the last mission of Kedushin, which is a very long Mishnah, but the last mission of Kedushin says, Rabbi Meir, Reimer, Li'olam yalamed adam es b'nai umnos nikia v'kala. A father has an obligation to teach his son a profession, umnas, profession. So I'll first translate it literally. Nikia, that's clean and easy. Teach your son, or at least the way it is usually today is, pay for your son to get an umnas, a job that is nikia, clean, and kala. So first of all, just in terms of translation, what do we mean by clean? We don't mean necessarily don't be a garbage man. A garbage man can also be a way of making a living, and fakert, you're makayim yishuv Eretz Yisrael, by at least here, by cleaning up the street. But nikia primarily means that without averos, meaning nikia means honest, without geneva. Now don't train your child to do a job that involves a lot of cheating and a lot of geneva stas. So nikia is primarily honesty, and kala means something that doesn't take up so many hours that there's no time for Torah and proper tefillah and proper family time. Now this itself, just without even getting into any amkas, this itself is a very, very important lesson. That the Torah does understand that many people are going to work. Many people will not be in kollel, and I'll be marach in that in a few moments. And therefore we have to enter the working world. We have to have an umnis. And it's part of a father's responsibility to give his son the wherewithal to have an umnis, either by directly teaching him, if he has a business, for example, or by paying for some type of training program, education. It doesn't have to be a 4-year university, but there's some training for a job. But the two conditions for umnis is that it be ehrlich, that it be honest, because remember the very first question that HaKadosh Baruch Hu asks us after 120 years, the very first question is Nasasa v'nasata b'yamuna. Did you conduct your business affairs with honesty? That's the question number one. Kavata itim l'Torah. Did you set aside time for Torah learning is number two. It's the second question, not the first question. Nasasa v'nasata b'yamuna is the first question. And even that meaning, the word emuna has two meanings, two translations. Emuna means honesty. Emunah also means faith in God. And if you think about it, in other words, did you conduct your business honestly? Did you conduct your business with faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Now, think about it. The two explanations are ha-b'ha-tauya. Because if I truly believe that the makor of my parnasa is from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then how can I possibly think I'm going to be matzliach if I do things keneged Hashem's ratzon? See, bishlama, if my parnasa was totally on me, so I might think, okay, listen, if I lie and I cheat and I steal, I'll come out ahead. But that means I don't have emunah that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is kevei my parnasa. If I have emunah that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is kevei my parnasa, then behechrich I have to be honest in business. You're going to ask me, what do I mean? There are people who cheat who come out ahead. All right, so there are a lot of answers. It's short term. It's not going to last. Eventually it's going to, maybe even not in their life, eventually it'll be discovered. But it's not shayach to have a kiyum. It's not shayach that a parnasa keneged the ratzon Hashem is going to have any success. So that's the requirement of nikia. Honest, ehrlich. In Yiddish, ehrlich is sincere. And the second one is kala. Kala is easy. Now, we don't mean necessarily mamash easy, but it shouldn't be too time-consuming. Now, there are two components in time-consuming. There is actual time, right? Don't work 60 hours a week. But it also refers to a certain mental exhaustion, meaning to say it should be a parnasa that when you're working, you're working. When you're not working, you're not going to have it in your head all the time. Right? Certain types of jobs, even when you're not working, you're always worried about it. So that's a stira to the idea of kala. Kala should be, when I'm learning, I'm panoi, I don't, this doesn't bother me so much. Okay. So derech agav, although the Gemara doesn't talk about this, I need to tell you a word from the Brisker Rav because it's a gavaldik word, mamish on this Mishnah. The Mishnah says, "Li'olam yelamed adam es benai umnas nikiya v'kala." Now, weiter on, the Mishnah says, "Amar Rav Nehurai, meiniach ani kol umnas sheba'olam." I would forget about job training, forget about jobs. Ve'eini melamed es banai ala Torah. I would only teach my son Torah. Forget about parnasa. Who cares? So we seem to have a machlekes, Rabbi Meir and Rav Nehurai. Should I teach my son a parnasa, or should I just direct him to limud Torah? Forget it. Parnasa will take care of itself. Seems to be a machlekes. But Frek the Brisker Rav, the gavaldik kasha. The Gemara in Eruvin says, Rabbi Meir and Rav Nehurai are the same person. In fact, Meir is the Hebrew for Nahorai. Meir, to give light, and Nahora in Aramaic is light. And the Gemara says in Eruvin Beferish, Rav Nehurai and Rabbi Meir are the same person. If that's so, the Brisker Rav says, the Kabbalah Kasha, in a single Mishnah, you have a stira. Rabbi Meir says, I got to teach my son a parnasa. Rav Nehurai says, Eini melamed es b'nai, banai. Machlekes if you read it singular or plural, it's either b'nai or banai. But Eini melamed es banai ala Torah. Right, so it's a stira. So the Brisker Rav says like this: we can actually be miyashiv based on the yesod of the Gra. Now this yesod is not in the Even Shelaima; it's in the Bir HaGra, in the Shulchan Aruch. And that is like this. Everyone knows, you've heard over the years or learned the machlekes on Kriya Shema, where we say, Hashem says, Vayam Shemaya, if you listen to the mitzvahs. So it says, V'asafta teganecha, you will gather your grain. So Rabbi Yishmael darshans on that pasuk. We see from here, if the Torah tells me, if I keep the mitzvahs, I'm going to gather my grain. V'aistachais, the Torah permits parnasa. The Torah permits you to have a parnasa. It's not bittul Torah. V'asafta teganecha. So according to Rabbi Yishmael, there's such a thing called a heter of parnasa, even though there's bittul Torah by definition. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, surprisingly, is chaylek. He says, parnasa, what are you talking about? The person is going to be choresh. He's going to plow when it's time to plow. Zereya when it's time to be zereya. Kaitzer when it's time to kaitzer. How is he going to learn? So it's a davar pashut, he says. The Yosafta de Gonecha is talking about when Yisrael is ein eisen ritzaynei shalmakim. When they're not doing Hashem's will, then the Yosafta de Gonecha. If they're doing Hashem's will, malachtan nasis ayidei acherim. Some of the goyim or the lotteries, or whatever it would be, the malacha would get done. Now Tosas just asks right away, Akasha, what do you mean? V'yasafta teganecha is bisman sheYisrael ein oisin b'tzaynei shel makom. What does that mean? The pasuk says v'haya im shamoa tishmu. You're listening to me. V'yasafta teganecha. So Tosfos says avada Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai doesn't mean when Yisrael are rishayim, but it means oisin v'ein oisin. They're doing mitzvahs, but they're not living at the proper madrega. That's called ein oisin b'tzaynei shel makom. Now, indeed, this was exactly how Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai himself lived. Remember, he ran away because the Romans wanted to kill him. And he was alone with his son, Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon, who's buried next to him in Meron. And for 12 years, the birds brought them food, and there were trees that sprouted up with fruit and water. His basic attitude is, it worked for me. I dedicated myself to Avodas Hashem, and I got my parnasa. It can work for everybody. That's what he's saying, actually. Everybody can do this. What's the heter for parnasa when you have the possibility of bittul Torah? And the Gemara Taka says, after 12 years, he left the Ma'ara, and he saw farmers working, and he couldn't believe it. People are working. What's going on? Meiniach chayei olam. They're setting aside eternal life to be oiskim b'chayei shah, for temporary things. So he would just look at them and they would burn up. Again, we don't mean that he tried to kill them, but just whatever the hakpada that he had was gairim a kitruk, a prosecution in Shelaima. Of course, he was ordered to go back to the cave. He wasn't ready. Then a year later he came out, and once again he saw somebody, Erev Shabbos, a farmer, carrying 2 bundles of hadassim, and he was going to burn him up too, like what's he doing? But when the farmer said, oh, this is in honor of Shabbos, one for Zachor, one for Shomar, so he realized that even the Gashmias could be used in a holy way. But the point I'm making is, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's shita, that who needs Parnasa, is the way he lived his life. Now, the Gemara then goes on and says, Harbe Asu Rabbi Yishmael. Many people followed the Hanhaga of Rabbi Yishmael to combine their Torah learning with Parnasa. V'yolsa b'yadam, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu blessed them. They were matzliach. Harbe Asuk Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Many people tried to do like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. They didn't make hishtadlus. By the way, kailal is not. When you're in a kailal and you're getting some money, you are doing a hishtadlus. This is not kailal versus not kailal. Rather, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai took a position that's much more extreme than even somebody in kailal. His position was, don't do hishtadlus at all. Just walk into a base medrash. Don't bother to make any arrangement for money, and it'll come to you. See, people sometimes touch up that Rabbi Yishmael was against kailal. He says, no, Rabbi Yishmael was against not having hishtadlus. So, if you make a hishtadlus, kailal can also be a hishtadlus, right? That's a separate issue. But the Gemara says, many people did Rabbi Yishmael's plan and it was good for them. Many people went like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and they were starving. So, the pashtus of the Gemara indicates that people should follow Rabbi Yishmael's midah. Because that's what the Gemara says. Harbe Yasuk Rabbi Yishmael, V'yolsa b'yadam. Harbe Yasuk Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, V'loi also b'yadam, right? But the Gra is medayak in the Bir HaGra, that it doesn't stamazai say, Ein halacha ki Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, or it doesn't say, halacha ki Rabbi Yishmael. It simply makes a factual assertion. Many people followed Rabbi Yishmael and they were matzliach. Many people followed Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, they weren't matzliach. So says the Gra, the pshat is like this. For a majority of people, they should take the path of Rabbi Yishmael. But there will always be a miut in every generation that is so great in their commitment to Torah and in their amunah in Hashem, that they will be able to live on the madrega of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. The Gemara does not reject the pathway of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. The Gemara simply says it is for the minority rather than the majority. Now, that raises a very good question, a practical question. So when I plan my path in life, how do I know if I'm supposed to be tofes the midah of Rabbi Yishmael or be tofes the midah of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai? Because according to the Gra, the hadracha of the Gemara is most people should follow the Rabbi Yishmael path, and some people can follow the Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai path. It's a very excellent question. I will say that it seems that in order to qualify for the Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, it's not enough that you like to learn. Not everybody, but a lot of people like to learn. Rather, the idea is that your mesiras nefesh for Torah is so great that you will be willing to live on bread and water with simcha. Meaning, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai did not have steak every night during those 12 years. So really, the test is, are you a mistapek b'muat b'sever panim yafas? Which is a different thing. Meaning, if I have to have air conditioning and I have to have an SUV, but I expect the seaboard to kind of take care of me because I'm learning in Kailo, okay, if you can get that arrangement, because hey, I'm not even knocking the arrangement, but that is not the midah of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. The midah of Shimon Bar Yochai is like Rav Steinman, who kind of lived in a shack and was sameach b'chelkai his whole life, he and his Rebbetzin. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about the Midah of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. It's really a matter of Mesiras Nefesh as well as Amunah in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay, so with this Bir Hagra, to explain the Gemara, Harbe Yasuk Rabbi Yishmael, V'yolsa B'yadam, V'harbe Yasuk Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai V'yolsa B'yadam, the Brisker Rav says we have a Gavaldiga Yishuv for the Stira in the Mishnah and Kedushin's Mamish, a beautiful word. He says, when Rabbi Meir says in the first statement, a father should teach his son Umnus Nakiya V'Kala, Rabbi Meir is echoing exactly what Rabbi Yishmael said, that since for most people we're mechoyev to have a parnasa, so Rabbi Meir says a father should teach his son a parnasa that is both honest and not overly time-consuming. That's the midah of Rabbi Yishmael. Now, the second statement is no longer a statement for the rabbin. It's a statement about his own personal family. Look at it, says, right? Eini malamed es banai. In other words, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Nerai is Rabbi Meir. He's aimed on the fact that there are yechidei segula. And Rabbi Nerai is saying, these are my sons. That in spite of what I said, there's a mistakia bakala, but for yechidei segula, they should go on the midah of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and memela eini malamed es banai elatayra. That's the Gra, because it's only Harbe Yasuk Rabbi Yishmael, also Biyadam, Harbe Yasuk Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, also Biyadam, but there's going to be a not Harbe, a Miyut, that should follow Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So the Brisker Rav says the two statements of Rabbi Meir can be understood in light of the Bir HaGra, that the Rabbim should follow the Hayra of Rabbi Yishmael, and the Miyut should follow the Hayra of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And that's a Gavaldiga deal. Now I'm just wondering if these are the same sons of Rabbi Meir who died. It's very, very interesting. You may remember the famous Maisa that Rabbi Meir had two sons, and the sons died on Shabbos. And Broria, his wife, she was the daughter of the Tanakh of Hananiah ben Shirajeh, one of the Asar Hurugim Malchus. He was the one that they wrapped the Sefer Torah around, and they set him on fire, and and he said the letters are going to Shemayim even though the parchment is being burnt, etc. So his daughter was Broria, and Broria was known as a very, very learned woman, a very wise woman. And when Rav Meir came home, it was Shabbos, so she asked him that I was given 2 jewels to watch, and the owner came back and wants the jewels. Do I have to give it back to him? So Rav Meir says, of course you have to give it back to him. You're just a pikadon. It doesn't belong to you. So Rabbi Meir says, so she said to Rabbi Meir, the Eibishter gave us 2 jewels that belonged to him, and now he's come back to claim them. How can we complain? It wasn't ours. So I'm just wondering, Daka, if these were the sons that Rabbi Meir was talking about in Maseres Kedushin, which adds a little bit to the story, because apparently they were very, very great, at least potentially. We don't know how old they were, but they were not married apparently. They were living in the house. That apparently they had the great, great potential for godless and Torah, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu took them. Again, I think it adds a little nekuda. And that's why the reading would be Eini Melamed es Bonai. Bonai is Lashon Rabbin, because it's referring to those 2 sons. Although I think the standard nikud is B'nai. I think that's how they put the nekudas. I'm not sure how you know, right? In Hebrew, how do you know? When you see Beis Nun Yud, is it Banai or B'nai? You can't really tell from the letters themselves. By the way, the Chassam Sofer says another nekuda, which is very, very interesting. He says like this. He says that the Machlokes Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, whether Parnasa or just learning, is only a machlokes in Eretz Yisrael, where even work is considered to be holy because you're building up the economy of Eretz Yisrael. He says, in Chutz La'aretz, he says, even Rabbi Yishmael would be Maida to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, that try to forget about Parnasa and just put your life in Avodas Hashem, because there's no particular mitzvah to build up the economy of America or France or whatever. So that's interesting. According to that, In Eretz Yisrael, you can work, but in Chutz La'aretz, you got to be in Kailo. It's kind of almost the opposite a little bit of what it turns out in real life. But that's what Yitzchak is. Yitzchak is in Eretz Yisrael, even the Gashmias is Ruchnias. So Memela, Rabbi Yishmael says Parnasa has a legitimate role. Even then, I wonder, because maybe it's only agriculture Parnasa, where your mamish, improving the land. I don't know. I don't know if the Sam Sefer Sfar would automatically apply to be a lawyer or an accountant or something like that. Okay, Beseder. But going back to the Evan Shelaima, he says, just like in Umnus, one should have an Umnus to Kiyah Vakala, that's at least Rabbi Yishmael Shita. So he says, Kain Batayra. Torah is also Umnus. In fact, it's interesting. The Mefarshim say this. The first bracha of Birchas HaTorah, Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvaysav v'tzivanu lasaik b'divrei Torah. So the English says, you have commanded us to occupy ourselves with Torah. But some say that asek means business. Lasaik, Torah is my business. That's my job. In other words, one should have a sense that this is my job. In fact, there's you might call it a bittersweet joke from Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky. Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky was, Baruch Hashem, he was Zeicha to Harvichas Yamim, so he had a very long retirement in Muncie. I mean, retirement, he was busy the whole day, but he didn't have any official position. But for many years before that, he was the Rosh Yeshiva of Torah V'das. And yeshiva guys always have, Baruch Hashem, we always have simchas to go to. Chasnas, brisses, Pidyon Abens this morning. And the guys were always asking him to go here, to go there, etc. And he said he didn't like it. He would say, now he understands the pshat of the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. Ein ben chayrin elamisha isek b'Torah. The only free person is a person who learns. Because in any other job in the world, you can't just go to every wedding that you want to go to. I mean, you got a working schedule. You got to stick to your schedule. But if I'm learning, I can always take off for everything. So he says, he was saying it that sadly. Ein ben chayrin elamisha isek b'Torah. So fakir. So the corrective is, you got to look at your Siddurim like your business. This is your job. It's your job. So you can't just take off for this and for that. Yeah, there are reasons. Listen, there are reasons a person takes off from his job too. So if something is a big thing, okay, so you take off. But you got to take your learning. I mean, maybe these are Dvarim Pshutim. I'm saying you got to take your learning as seriously as you take your job. Okay, and yet we don't have it that way. Learning, like any little excuse, I can do that, etc. So this now, you're going to ask me a kasha about chasnas. Well, wait a second. Don't Chazal say that we're mevatlim Talmud Torah? We were mevatel Torah for two things: hachnasas kala, to escort the kala, which means simchas chasam bekala, and levayas hameis. So for Keret, I should go to every wedding I can, because it says we're mevatel Talmud Torah, lachnasas kala. So the Nitziv writes, and maybe not everybody agrees, but the Nitziv writes that just means if a chasna is right in front of you, in other words, there's a procession of a chasna right in front of me, or a levaya right in front of me, I am mechayiv to stop learning and spend 5 minutes misameach chasna b'kala. But to go to something, even in the same city, and kal v'chaymer, to go out of town, he says there is b'chlal no chiyav b'chlal. There is no chiyav of hachnasas kala. Now, there may be another shikol, and that is the halacha in the Rambam is that any mitzvah that cannot be done by anybody else, you can be mevatel Talmud Torah for. So here's where weddings come in. This is the heter of a close friend. In other words, if my relationship to the chassan is so strong that if I don't go, somebody else being there doesn't make it up. So that's called already a mitzvah she'i efshir la'asaisa al yidei acherim. So that is a cheshbon that I can be mevatel Talmud Torah. But and that would also include a situation where no one is coming. There are very few people that are coming, so I could regard myself, this is a mitzvah that's not going to be done by other people. But if the pshat is, again, I don't want to be a spokesman, I don't want to ruin anybody's chasna, so I'm not giving a psak halacha. I'm just saying some things. generally. But if the pshat is, there'll be plenty of guys there, plenty of friends there, family there, and you're not so close to the chassan, right? So then there's a bit of a shaila. You see, this is why a Rosh Hashiva can go. You may ask, well, so how come Rosh Hashivas go to weddings? The answer is because b'derech klal, a Rosh Hashiva is ef shir lasas aydei achayrim, because there's a special chashivas in the Rosh Hashiva being there. So memela, that simcha could not be supplied by anybody else. So the Rosh Hashiva would have such a heter to go to 1,000,000 chasnas. That wouldn't automatically apply to a bachar. So it's again something to think about. I mean, it's a difficult shikol, but that is the significance of Torah being a business. Lasek b'divrei Torah, and indeed the Gra here is comparing Torah to an umnus, and he says just like an umnus has to be nikiya v'kala, so by Torah he says yevakesh limud kal. Shelo yehe yoser miyacholtai v'yokotzba, unekiya shelo yiyeh bo peniya. So this is fascinating, and this is from Bir Hagrad in Agadah of Brachas, that just like all umnus has to be nekiya v'kala, so in the umnus of Talmud Torah, there's also an inyan I should have an umnus nekiya v'kala. What's nekiya? Nikiya means a limud that is relatively easy, that is not beyond your ability, because if it's really beyond your ability, yokotzba, you might get disgusted with it. I'll come back to that in a minute. And Nikiya means you try to purify yourself, so your motives are l'shem shamayim, lishma, right? So Nikiya is to try to be lishma. Now, the Gra is not necessarily talking about your whole Seder Halimut, because if the pshat is, I only want to learn easy things, then, maybe I wouldn't learn tomorrow at all. I mean, somebody once asked the Chazon Ish for an Eitzah, can you give me an easy Masechta to learn? So the Chazon Ish says, Lo matzasi kalais, I have not found it. The Chazon Ish says, there's no such thing as an easy Masechta, people, whatever it is. But the Gra does mean that within your Seder Halimut that may be very, very challenging, in order to get chizuk to go on, you have to have some aspect of Torah that kind of is easier for you to absorb. Something that's quick, something that's mechazik you, something that builds you up, something that gives you immediate simcha and feedback. Because that will be the chizuk that will allow me to then tackle the things that are more difficult. Because if all of your learning are things that are hard for you that you don't get, at some point you're going to lose your cheshik. Right? So that's why people, every person is different. That's why some people might like Chasidus B'davka, a little bit of Chasidus, or Agadata, or Medrash, or Chumash, putting aside the halacha of Shnai Mikra, but that's the one to learn extra things in Chumash. Musar, Musar has other reasons to learn, mainly for Musar, but one could also learn Musar because they enjoy the discussions of Musar. And this is what the Gra calls a limud kal, a bekiyas. Bekiyas, for many people, can be a limud kal. Not for everybody, but that could be what they like. So the Gra says it's important to have a chelik of Torah that's easy for you, in spite of the fact that amelus is the yikr, but your kayach to be amel depends on your having a certain joy in your learning, and therefore you have to have something easy. And in addition, you should try to have something that you learn that is l'shem shamayim, meaning, once again, the understanding will be that maybe it's not shayach, that you can do all of your learning l'shma. But there should be a chelik, that's umnus nikiya v'kal. Now, what's interesting is, I think in some ways, it may not be the same thing, meaning the part of my learning that's nikiya may be a different part than that which is kala, because it's almost the opposite. Because the thing that I enjoy might be harder to do at l'shem shamayim, because I enjoy it, right? So he's not saying it has to be the same thing, but there should be a chelik of my learning that's mamish l'shem shamayim, and there should be a chelik of my learning that is kala, and therefore the Rameir's statement, Nikiya Bakala is not only referring to a job, but it's also referring to Talmud Torah, which is our job. So this is important. The Gemara says you got to find something in Torah that gives you a geschmack. Without that geschmack, you're going to be yokotzbar. You're going to reject it. You're going to feel disgusted by it, and then nothing's going to happen. Now he then goes on and says, "V'chein hatinaitais lo yachbidu alein." Now again, this is surprising coming from the Vilna Gaon. He says, "Tinaitais," it doesn't mean babies; it means children. Children in cheder, do not be overly strict with them. Don't put them to such a hard schedule. Give them recess. Let them run around. You know, I'm not sure what the recess schedule was in Vilna, but what everybody says, don't be too rough on them, and it should be benachas. The Rebbe must be very gentle with them, and if kids fool around sometimes, they fool around. V'laseis lehem prutais, even bribe them by giving them money, small money, prutas, pennies or kopecks, whatever it would be. Ki halimud, this is a beautiful statement. Ki halimud eino nikfa ba'adam. Learning does not become firmly established in a person. Ki im b'yishuv, only when there is serenity, when there is calmness, ubenachas, and when it's done with gentility. Now we know that there are all sorts of stories. And again, I'm not saying the stories are always true, but a lot of people from Europe, because they came to America and they stopped being religious, so they would often blame the Cheder Rebbes. So they used to beat us, they used to hit us, they used to, if we were wandering a little bit, our attention wandering, they would, smack us. And we had such a negative feeling towards learning and Torah that we just wanted to leave it as soon as we could. Now again, it could be that these were not always true stories either, but Lamaisa, there were Melamdim in the world that had that kind of approach, and the Gra is saying that in the chinuch of our children, whether you're a Rebbe or a parent, because the message is to both people, you got to be gentle, and you should not push too much on a child. And you should develop in the child a love of Torah. And with that love, it'll then have its own momentum. Rav Chaim Kanievsky used to say, it's a strange thing. Rav Chaim Kanievsky said that the only reason he sits and he learns is because nobody ever told him he had to. It's hard to believe, but this is what he said. He said, if I would be told I have to learn, he says I couldn't sit half an hour. But no one ever told me I had to do it. So I did it because I wanted to do it. And then, that developed the cheshek, right? He said, the truth is, I actually don't believe, I believe that he said it, but I don't believe it's really true. But he was saying it to make a point. He actually said, if I would be told I had to learn, he says, I couldn't learn more than half an hour. But I was not told I have to learn. So, and again, and if you're raised with a gadol, you're raised with a stipler, you're raised with people that have such a love of learning, so you absorb it because you love to do it, not because somebody is saying, learn or I'll heat you, or learn or you won't get supper, or whatever it is. So the Gra says you have to be very, very gentle with children. Okay, so now he then says what the ideal limud is, and this will be a little different than we do today. B'tzorech shel yilmadu mikedem kol hachumash sheyiyu regilim kimat balpeh. The first thing you do with your children is they learn all of the Chumash. Now it doesn't even say Rashi actually, okay, but we'll see. And they should learn Chumash over and over and over and over again till they know it virtually by heart. They should know the Chumash. Now, well, first of all, let me just say that what we're going to see in this chapter is kind of the foundation of what is called the Zilberman Chinuch in Eretz Yisrael, because Rav Zilberman was actually following the one who was Miyaseh, that Shita were first. Really, it's based on Pirkei Avos, right? Let's go back to Pirkei Avos. Pirkei Avos says, Ben Chamesh Lemikra. When a child is 5 years old, he should start learning Tanakh. Ben Eser, when he is 10 years old, he should start learning Mishnah. Now let's stop right there. So what did you do between 5 and 10? Mikra. Only Mikra. Mikra. Now Mikra, we'll see, doesn't only mean Chumash, it means all of Tanakh. They learn Mikra over and over and over and over again for 5 years. For 5 years. Only after 5 years of Mikra do you then start Mishnah. You start Mishnah at 10, not at 8, at 10. And you do Mishnah for 5 years. And then it says at age 15, Talmud. Now you have to understand what Talmud means. What is Talmud? It's a little confusing. Pirkei Avos is a Mishnah. When the Mishnah was written, there was no Gemara. So what does it mean? At 5 you do Mikra. At 10 you do Mishnah. At 15 you do Talmud. There was no book called Talmud then. But the answer is Pashut. Of course there was, except it was Baal Peh. In other words, Talmud essentially means in-depth, analytical understandings of the Mishnah. Contradictions, answers, Yeshuvim. Of course there was that. That was learning Be'iyun. Learning the Mishnah Be'iyun was Gemara. Okay, so the Gemara, the Mishnah does not mean there was a book called Talmud, but it means the Iyun, meaning 5 years of Mikra, 5 years of Mishnah, and then you start being Ma'ayin in things. Which means you didn't start, so today that would mean you wouldn't start learning Gemara till you were 15 years old. That's way, way later than Stam. But the Zilberman system is based on the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, which is based, and the Gra, because the Gra follows that Mahalach, basically. So in many ways, the Gra is not Machadish anything. The Gra is going back to the way Chazal wanted it to be. Now, if you follow that Mahalach, in fact, I don't fully understand why the Zilberman is not universally followed. It's a different type of thing. When you learn Gemara and you already know, how much time, when you're learning a Gemara, how much time do you have to spend? Like, what's the Mishnah talking about? What's the case here? What's the situation here? There's so much time we spend trying to get the basic knowledge that a sugya presupposes. See, one of the things you know in Gemara is that there's so much the Gemara is assuming that you know about a subject, that the Gemara is not even talking about it. The Gemara is talking about assuming you know A to Z, we're going to talk about double A, triple A, whatever it is. The A to Z, you're supposed to know already. Well, how am I supposed to know it? I know it because I learned Mishnayos 100 times. So I know the Yesodos of the Halacha. So it's a totally different thing. And Chumash as well, right? All of the drashas, Chazal have 1,000,000 drashas on sugyas of Nezikin. If I knew the psukim, I would understand the drashas, right? How many times you're looking up this pasuk, looking up that pasuk. Now the Gemaras are better now. They print the whole pasuk on the side. Okay, Baruch Hashem, it's actually very good. Those things are very good. But imagine if you knew that stuff. It'd be totally different. And even now I tell people, the summer before, in your Bein Hazmanim in the summer, learn the Mishnayos of the Maseches. Let's say you're doing Gittin this year. So learn Mishnayos Gittin over the summer. Maybe learning Maseches Gittin over the summer in Gemara might be too hard. But Mishnayos you can do. And Chazar it 3 or 4 times. You'll have a different experience in your Gemara learning when you have the basic knowledge of the subject. So Chazal really wanted it to be this structured way. 5 years of Tanakh, 5 years of Chumash, 5 years of Mishnah. And then you're ready to analyze and be mafalpel, which we call Gemara and the like. So it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. The only thing I do want to say, that in yeshiva like Or Sameach, if you're not an FFB, if you didn't start from the age of 5, let's say you didn't start learning at 5, you started learning at 25. So we have a certain dilemma. Our dilemma is the following. If a 25-year-old guy who just begins learning now, he hasn't learned until now, comes, so I would basically tell him the following. Listen, if you're willing to sign a 20-year contract, if you're willing to spend the next 20 years full-time learning, then yeah, I'm going to do Pirkei Avos. Why should I teach you Gemara now? Learn Chumash for 5 years. Learn Mishnah for 5 years. And after 10 years, we're really going to do Gemara. Great. Yeah, I would do it at 25 too. Problem is, most people are not able to give you a 20-year commitment. So somebody's here for 2 years. Says, I'm learning yeshiva 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. There is a reason I can't apply the Pirkei Avos system. Because if they leave before they have a Gemara background, it's going to be very, very hard to acquire it later. And the reason is because Gemara requires full-time immersion, meaning other limudim you might be able to do on a part-time basis. It's very hard for a person to even learn how to make a laning on Gemara unless they're in a full-time immersion. So, the way we do it in yeshiva is totally wrong, but it may be the best that we're able to do. Meaning, it's like Winston Churchill said about democracy. He said, it is the worst form of government ever invented, except for everything else. So I can say, the yeshivish way of learning is like the worst way of learning, but it may be better than anything else. In other words, state of emergency. But my limud zechus is for a place like Or Sameach. But when I'm raising my children from a young age to learn Torah, why should I go with that derech at all? I should go with Pirkei Avos. I should go with the Gra. I should go with Zilberman. In other words, whatever hisnatzlus we have, whatever excuses we have for people who come late to learning, is l'chayra not a teretz for kids who are starting at 5. Like, why should I start my 6-year-old on Mishnayos or whatever it is? Why shouldn't I do Chumash for 5 years? So it's a bit of a tzorechiyim. Why the Welt is not noyeg that way. And the funny thing is, I mean, again, it's a little strange, because what the Gra is saying was not the minhag in Europe either. In other words, in Vilna, Gufa. I mean, when the Gra only went to Cheder a very short time. I mean, the Gra was not a product of the Cheder system. In fact, there's a famous story, which is almost certainly a false story, but it's a cute story. I'll tell you the story. They say that a person met the Gra, and he says he knew the Gra from Cheder. They were in Cheder together. So he says to the Gra, it's a crazy story, but it's cute. He says to the Gra, Rebbe Leo, you and I, we were in Cheder together. We were sitting next to each other. So, like, why did you become what you became, and I became what I became? Like, we started off exactly the same. So the Gra said like this, so do you know the Maimer Chazal, that Eino Daima, a person who chazers 101 times, there's no comparison to a person who only learns 100 times. Do you know that Maimer Chazal? So the person says, yeah, I know the Maimer Chazal, sure. The Vilna Gaon says, are you Maimin in the Maimer Chazal? The person says, of course I'm Maimin. The Vilna Gaon says, I wasn't Maimin, I had to test it out. I had to... He says, so that's the difference. I wasn't Semech in the Maimer Chazal. I wanted to see what it's like to chazer 101 times. Now again, it's a cute story, and it makes a good point. But Lemaisa, the idea that somehow the Gra started, in Cheder with everybody else, and he didn't. I mean, the Gra already at 6 years old, in the Hakdama to the Bir Gra and the Shulchan Aruch, his sons write that when our father was 6 years old, he gave a drasha, a pilpul, in the big Shul of Vilna, in front of all the Talmidei Chachamim, and many of them were amazed. Other people, he says, weren't so impressed because they said, his father taught him. Now, you see what the Madrega, I mean, for a 6-year-old to say what his father taught him would have been an amazing thing, but his father taught him was not a big deal. But the point was, the Gra was known as a tremendous Eloi, from the youngest age. So the idea that he was sitting in Cheder with people, I think he may have been in Cheder for like 2 months or something, and then there were private teachers. In fact, one of the Gra's Rebbeim, actually, is, you may not, if you ever looked at a Talmud Yerushalmi, so one of the Mefarshim, kind of like the Rashi on the Talmud Yerushalmi, is the Pnei Moshe. Pnei Moshe is the main parish on the Yerushalmi, Rav Moshe Margolis. And it's the only parish that's on the whole Yerushalmi. Every other Mefarshim are on this Masechta, that Masechta. The Pnei Moshe was the Rebbe of the Graf for like 6 months or so. So in addition to the Pnei Moshe's own godless, he was able to be a Rebbe of the Graf. But they say about that though another nekuda, that the Gra was machabed the Rebbe who taught him the Aleph Beis. He says tremendously, because he said that's the one Rebbe I know who taught me the emes. He says anyone else, you never know. I mentioned this, Rabbi Wiener, the Shlomo Wiener, the head of the center, his mother-in-law, she should be well, was my kindergarten teacher. So Baruch Hashem, she's alive and doing well, and I see her every once in a while. Whenever I see her, I always say, she is the one who taught me that I know is emes, the stuff you learned in kindergarten. That's always going to be emes. Okay, so we'll go right with this. But again, the Graz Yesod is that what he's really criticizing so much is that when younger kids, even teenagers, they're into pilpul, they're into what's called iyun, they're into all of these chakiras, and they don't understand the basic pshat. They don't understand the basic material. Their learning is very defective. They think they're doing iyun. They don't really know what they're talking about. They don't have the knowledge. When you have knowledge and then you ask questions and you give answers, that's a different type of thing. When you simply don't know basic pshat, then you're just moving around in the darkness. And therefore the Graz Hakpada was that we have to create a system where people are not just learning, but they're acquiring knowledge of the Torah. See, there are two different mitzvahs. There's a mitzvah of limud ha-Torah. Now, limud ha-Torah, I could learn the same thing my whole life. I can learn one pasuk, and that would be enough. But there's also a mitzvah of yedias ha-Torah, knowing the Torah. And to know Torah, there's a specific way of doing it, because if you just go into the Pilpulim without the knowledge base, you don't really know anything. And that's why when I say in Harabim, you can have a situation of even people who learn for many, many years. They learn many, many years, and they're not shirkers. And they don't know a lot. And you wonder, how is it shaykh? A person learns for 12 years in the yeshiva, 20 years in the yeshiva, and doesn't know a lot. Part of it is because they didn't follow this hadracha of layering things and mastering one level before you go on to the next level. And by the way, the Maharal, much earlier than the Glass, said the same thing. Maharal had a big taina on the educational system of his time. Okay, we'll stop here.